Today, our lesson is chapter 16, section number 1, which gets us started into the chapter about Native Americans. So we're going to take a look today at North America, what is mostly the modern day United States. Then in section 2, we'll go to central Mexico, look at the Maya. Section 3, we'll look at the Aztec. And then section 4 travels down to South America to look at the Inca. So let's get ready to go into chapter 16, section 1. We're going to start and move from west to east along the Native American tribes from North America. We will begin with a few introductory points with capital letter A, societies. I would say that the societies in North America, or the ones that we could say were from modern day United States, they didn't have as much advancement as those of Mesoamerica and also South America. However, they did create complex societies that participated in long-distance trade, and they did construct buildings. The reason that I say this is that we find very rare, large, spectacular ruins in the native areas of North America, modern-day United States. In Mexico, we have ruins from the Aztec and from the Maya. In South America, we have great stone-worked ruins from the Inca, but we don't find much of that in the modern day United States, which is the part of North America that we're really focusing on for today's lesson. Okay, let's start in the Pacific Northwest. When I say the Pacific Northwest, I'm referring to this region here in the green, the tribes of the Kwakiutl, the Nootka, the Haida, the Chinook. These are tribes that we're going to talk about that inhabited this region, okay, of North America. Okay, so this region was actually very large in population. That's because it was rich in resources. It was right along the sea. So the Kwakiutl, the Nootka, the Haida peoples used that region or location to their advantage. They did use canoes to go out into the sea, staying always close to the coastline to hunt for whale. Now, these canoes were really large. They would basically take a very large tree. They would cut that tree down and they would hollow out, okay, the trunk of that tree to create these large canoes. On average, these canoes could carry about 15 people. Now, the coastal forest region in this area also provided food. Society was divided into social classes which were based on wealth. And the way that you proved your wealth and status in society was predicated on something called the potlatch. The potlatch for the natives in the Pacific Northwest has come to be known today as a potluck. Now, it's a ceremony in which people bring food, drink, and gifts to the community to display their wealth, rank, and prosperity. Now, the way that this works, guys, is when we have a potluck dinner, like you're having a banquet or something like that, everybody's asked to bring a dish to pass. But for Native Americans, what dish you brought was an exemplification of your wealth and status. So, for example, if let's say that the chief's daughter was getting married and they had a potlatch, everybody from the village and the tribe would come. They would bring gifts, okay? The gift that they were able to bring represented their wealth. You wanted to bring the best possible gift you could bring. So if we were to do this in modern day times, let's say we were going to have a class party and we said, hey, it's going to be a potlatch. You're going to bring your best possible dish or item to pass to the class. So some people are going to bring some paper plates. Some people are going to bring some bags of chips. Some people might bring some pizza from Little Caesars. Some people might bring some lobster tail or shrimp and butter sauce. So based on what people bring in the native world in the Pacific Northwest, that determined your status in society. Okay. If you were able to bring a fashioned blade or hunting knife for everyone in the tribe or village, you probably had a lot of wealth. You probably were fairly rich for some reason, for some possible factor there. If you're bringing the plates, okay, if that's the best that you can do, that's great. It's going to be appreciated. But if you're judging people based off of this in the social class system based on wealth, like natives in the Pacific Northwest did, then probably at the lower level there. So I think you guys can understand what I'm saying there. But we do potlucks today. They just don't have the implications that they did for the Pacific Northwest tribes. Okay, remember, Kwakiutl, Nootka, and Haida, they're on that map that I showed you. Those are the tribes that you want to focus on for the Pacific Northwest. We're going to bump down to the Southwest now. When we take a look at the Southwest, we're talking about this region down in here. Okay, this is the region that we would talk about being the Southwest, down in this region here. Okay, the Southwest is really dry. It's actually quite a bit of desert down there. Arizona, okay, Nevada, those regions. They had fewer natural resources than did the Pacific Northwest. Agriculture was developed in the 1500s, so that's really late worldwide. That's a really late development of agriculture. And of course, if you're in the desert region, very dry, you're going to have some form of irrigation. An example of a tribe that utilized irrigation was the Hohokam. The Hohokam are from this area. They were able to produce corn, beans, and squash, which in the Native American world, those are the three sisters. Okay, corn, beans, and squash are almost evident in every single tribe. Agriculture was one important thing, but they also created pottery. Okay, so they used clay pottery instead of woven baskets, along with certain religious practice. This suggests that they probably had contact with Mesoamerican societies like the Aztec, the Maya, probably the Toltec as well. Number 4 is a key term, another group that was from this region called the Anasazi. The Anasazi lived in the Four Corners region of where the present-day states of Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico meet. They actually influenced the Hohokam, so they came before the Hohokam, and they built what are called impressive cliff dwellings, which are known today as Mesa Verde, Colorado. You can find an example of these. And then also you have a lot of in this region mesas, which are flat-topped hills. Those impressive cliff dwellings are called pueblos. Pueblos are villages of large apartment-style compounds made of stone and adobe. Sometimes they're made of a clay that's sun-baked. Now, they started making these type of buildings in the 900s AD. There is a picture in your text. I'll scroll down to find it. Here is an example of a pueblo. You can see that this one is probably made of clay, and it's built right into the side of a cliff. This is the one at Mesa Verde. It had 217 rooms and 23 what are called kivas. These are basically circular spiritual worship houses. They would have had like a roof, and then they would have had smoke inside, and they would have done religious rituals in the kivas. They're like centers of religion for these native tribes. Okay, next. Let's go to the construction of these type of things required a great deal of human labor. You have to quarry the sandstone from canyon walls, then you have to carry it to the building site. They also created a mud-like mortar that was used to construct walls that went up 5 stories. This is called adobe. The adobe is a mixture of mud, clay, and straw. It hardens in the sun. In these type of structures in desert region, you're going to want to have small windows. Okay, why? You want to keep out the hot sun. If that sun is baking down in your dwelling all day long, it's going to make it very hot. Kivas, those are those underground religious ceremonial chambers that we talked about. I showed you in the picture there what a kiva was. Okay, let's talk about the fall of the Anasazi, which we believe happens around 1200, possibly due to drought. Okay, this is most likely the factor because of this desert region. If you're growing crops in the desert, you're going to have to rely on distant rivers, and you're going to have to channel that water. So that could be a major problem. After the Anasazi migrate away, Pueblos, a group that are the descendants of the Anasazi, sort of come into play. The Pueblos are 2 groups, the Hopi and the Zuni. They were most well known for trading pottery, blankets, and agricultural products with a group called the Plains Indians, which were to the east. The Plains Indians are the Comanche, the Apache, the Kiowa. You also might find the Sioux mixed in with the Plains Indians. I'll show you where the Plains Indians are from. The Plains Indians are from this region right here. If you see Lakota, that is the Sioux tribe that I'm mentioning. So this is the region right here, okay, that we're talking about with the Plains. Okay, next, let's go into Roman numeral 2, which is going to talk about mound builders and other woodland cultures. Geographically, the mound builders are focused on the areas east of the Mississippi River. So on this map, you've got some mound building groups near Michigan, where we are, in Ohio, and then all along the Mississippi here, Illinois region, okay, down into the Nebraska area, Iowa, Wisconsin. There are a lot of mound builders in this region right in here, Midwest, as we would say. Okay, one group is called the Adena. And what these groups did is they built very large earthen mounds. Okay, they're basically large, what I like to equate to as being like a sledding hill. And then at the top, there might be a temple or a flat top. Sometimes it's rounded, but they just dumped soil and continue to construct these large hills. The Adena were one of the early groups to do this. They built huge earthen mounds that were used to bury the dead. So a lot of what these mounds were are burial chambers, very similar to what the Egyptians did. Number two, the Hopewell, they built mounds that were actually much larger than those of the Adena near the Ohio Valley area. The Adena and the Hopewell are both from sort of Columbus area, Ohio. Number three, the Mississippian, this is a group of tribes. These are people that created thriving villages from about 800 to 1500 that were based on farming and trade. The most grand site is Cahokia. It's a major site of Mississippian culture. We believe that it was led by priest rulers that regulated farming activities. Now at Cahokia, today you can visit Cahokia. It's in Missouri/Illinois, right on the border there. It has a 100-foot high, flat-topped earthen pyramid, and it still remains. It's called Monk's Mound. It was discovered by French Christians that were creating a monastery, and they wanted to put their monastery on top of this big hill. Well, it turns out that that was actually a Native American mound, earthen mound that were built. Now, they had a very vast trading network. Okay, artifacts that have been discovered in the burial mounds suggest that these people had contact with societies all the way to the west, all the way south to Mesoamerica, and even into the Northeast. I do have a picture that I can show you of some of these mounds. This is Monk's Mound from Cahokia right here. This is one that's called Serpent's Mound. This is in Ohio, probably built by the Adena or the Hopewell, okay? And this is what like a Native American city that was based on mound building would look like. You can see how similar this is to the way that Mayan temples and things of that look, but this is all made of earth. And this is near the Mississippi River, you can see right there. So that river has a propensity to flood quite a bit. And if it does flood, one of the things that you have an advantage of is if you build your homes on top of these earthen mounds, they don't get flooded. It just comes up about 6 to 8 feet on the mound. So that was one of the advantages of building that type of a structure. Okay, next we'll go to the Northeast. We'll talk about the Iroquois. The Iroquois are located up here in the Northeast. You can see that there are 5 tribes in the Iroquois: the Cayuga, the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, and the Seneca. So let's take a look at the Iroquois. They're a group of tribes that spoke related languages and lived in the eastern Great Lakes region. When you think of the Iroquois, remember it's a group of tribes. So they created what's called a political alliance, and that political alliance was called the Iroquois League. It was made up of 5 tribes from Upper New York, and the alliance was founded to help promote cooperation and defense. It wasn't created to go out and conquer other tribes. Basically, the 5 tribes that you want to know: Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. The way that you can remember this is Mooks, Moocs. Mooks. Chief Hiawatha is generally credited with being the founder of the Iroquois League. He created and formed this league to promote joint defense and cooperation among the tribes. He was known as the Great Peacemaker, and it is believed that he served as the leader of both the Onondaga and the Mohawk tribes as chief. Next, we'll finish up the lesson with some cultural connections here. Most of these Native American groups existed because of trade networks. Connections between North Americans were economic and cultural. They traded, they had similar religious beliefs, and they had some shared social patterns, such as religion. Most Native groups believed in nature spirits. This is similar to the African concept that we learned about, known as animism. Some groups believed in one supreme spirit or great spirit that kind of was above all of the other spirits. They generally had great respect for the land as the source of life. They used the land, but they tried to alter it as little as possible. According to many Native tribes, not all, this is a generalization here, land was generally sacred, and it is believed that it was not considered to be a possession of any one person. So this had a great impact, okay, on relationships between Native Americans and Europeans. Because see, if you believe that, okay, land is sacred, then you believe that anyone can kind of come in through there. If you think that nobody really owns it, when the Europeans come in, you believe that if you can make a good relationship with them, they can use the land, you can use the land. Europeans didn't look at it like that. Europeans thought, oh, we own this plot of land and we just took it over. Well, natives continued to use that land because of their belief practices, which led to conflict. And some of the early conflicts in North America happened because of that factor right there. Finally, for today, we'll talk about a few social patterns. Family was most important. You had to use your family to survive. Family included parents, children, grandparents, and other close relatives. Most tribes were separated up into clans. These are groups of families that were descending from a common ancestor. You also had the use of totems. Totems are natural objects with which an individual, a clan, or a group identifies itself, such as masts, boats, or totem poles. I will show you what a totem pole looks like, gentlemen. Just give me 1 second. These are some examples of totem poles, okay? And totems could represent your clan. These would be like bird or eagle or seahawk clans. These are birds of the Pacific Northwest in general right there. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about Iroquois women. In the Iroquois society, it was matrilineal. Now, we just learned about that from Africa. They traced their descent through the female ancestors. Mothers controlled properties, held ceremonies, and determined official titles. Women gave men their titles, actually. The most important title was sachem, which meant chief. Women would also control and regulate the food supply. Therefore, even though men were the chiefs and war leaders, women could veto any of their decisions by refusing to supply the necessary food. So let's say the chief wants to go to war. Well, if the women say, we're not going to supply you with food, you're not really going to be able to go on that conquest. Remember, in most native societies, women did the farming and gathering while the men did the hunting. Okay, now this had a very big impact on gender roles because see what happens is if you're a Native American male and all your life you've been taught that women do the farming and women do the gathering and you do the hunting, when Europeans come in and eventually they enslaved Native Americans, okay? Europeans made Native Americans slaves and they forced men to do farm work. So for Native American men, this was like dehumanizing to them. This is taking away their masculinity. It was asking them to become a woman. And so a lot of them turned to alcohol or suicide due to the fact that this gender role had changed for them and it wasn't something that they could cope with very easily. Okay, so you got to understand cultural practices are very important in the lives of different groups of people. Thank you.